I'm Kelly Galbraith and welcome to Arts and Music of Southern New Brunswick. We celebrate artistic excellence past and present. The second episode in our series features St. John author William Edward Daniel Ross, known as Dan, but he's also known by many other monikers. Leslie Ames, Rose Dana, Ruth Dorset, Ellen Randolph, Dan Roberts, Clarissa Ross, Dana Ross, Marilyn Ross, Tex Steele, and Rose Williams. He sold over 40 million copies of his Dark Shadow series alone. His books were printed and translated and sold all over the world, and he didn't publish his first novel until he was 49. In 1969, Dan Ross said, "I'm probably Canada's most read unknown writer because I use so many pen names." Who was this most unknown writer? This man who was probably the most prolific of Canadian authors? A man who met Dolly Parton and David Letterman and wrote for a popular TV show. St. John, New Brunswick is a port city with a beautiful harbor. It is the oldest incorporated city in Canada and has a tradition of being an industrial center with rich historical connections to her shipping docks and railways. In this city, at the turn of the 20th century, lived and worked William Edward Ross. He was an investigator/police officer for the Canadian National Railway. In 1912, he married Laura Brooks in St. John. It wasn't long afterward that their only child, William Edward Daniel Ross, Dan, was born on November 16th of the same year. It's obvious that from childhood, Dan Ross enjoyed music and drama. As a teenager, he offered up his musical gifts by singing in the choir at St. John Anglican Stone Church. He attended St. John High School and was already making a name for himself as a thespian and writer. He wrote plays for his high school, and when he was 17 years old, Dan published articles for the Toronto Star Weekly. Dan said the first thing he ever published was about a woman who was a teacher in Siam, just about the time Anna and the King of Siam came out. This woman had been a teacher employed by the royal family as well, and that got me in print, he said. After graduation at 18, Dan packed his suitcase and moved to the lights and bustle of New York City, where he went on to study drama at the Provincetown Playhouse for 2 years. He plied his craft by working on radio productions and acting in summer stock theater for 8 years. Dan met famous St. John actor Walter Pidgeon, and he encouraged Dan to return to New Brunswick and start his own theater company. That's what he did. Dan performed with his wife Charlotte McCormack in New Brunswick and Prince Edward Island in a 5-member theater group, the Maritime Theater Players, as well with the Community Drama League of St. John. Dan acted and directed popular and classic dramas, and he also wrote plays for his company, which were really well received by packed houses. In his spare time, he wrote scripts for CBC for school broadcast on history. During the Second World War, Dan served with the British Entertainment Services and worked with John C. Wilson. He's known for directing Noel Coward's plays. And Dan also entertained the troops in New Brunswick. At the end of the war, Dan realized he didn't make very much money as an actor. He's on record saying that when he left the theater business, he had 25 cents in his pocket. Cinema was a big deal, and after the war, he ran a film distribution agency, Capital 16mm Films Company, from 1948 until 1957, distributing movies for Paramount and Monogram Films. The rising popularity of TV put a lid on his earnings as a distributor, so Dan switched his focus to writing short stories. For several years, the New York Daily News published one of Ross's short stories weekly. Dan said of that time in his life, "I wrote, and almost all of it came back. In my first 2 years, I grossed only $500. His short stories were published in the popular magazine Alfred Hitchcock's Mystery Magazine, and also the Mike Shane Mystery Magazine. Now, when short stories lost their popularity, he switched his efforts once again, this time to writing a novel. He was 48 years old. Dan honed his writing skills by studying at the University of Chicago, the University of Oklahoma, and Columbia University. His first novel was Summer Season, based on his experience in summer stock theater under the pen name Jane Rossiter. His wife and artistic partner Charlotte became ill with cancer. He put his writing on hold to care for her, and dealing with her death was indeed a sucker punch. Marilyn Ann Clark, Charlotte's nurse, wrote Dan a sympathy note. He got in touch, and they had their first date December 1st, 1959, and he proposed New Year's Eve. She said yes, and they married on July 2nd, 1960. It was a marriage and partnership that lasted 35 years until his passing. Marilyn was Dan's editor and proofreader. Eventually, in 1962, he found a publisher to publish his 2 books. That year, he wrote 9 books. He discovered he could write a book in 13 days, shorter time if necessary. Dan wrote novels in many genres: romances, gothics, mysteries, westerns, and nurse romances. In 1967, he had over 20 paperback novels appearing on bookshelves. China's Shadow was on the New York Times paperback bestseller list. The critic called him one of the formidable writing factories in this or any other hemisphere. In a 1969 article by N.R. Dreskin for Weekend Magazine, Dreskin wrote, Dan writes on a small sofa with a typewriter on his lap overlooking the Bay of Fundy. He begins writing at 11, breaks for lunch, and writes again until 7. He and Marilyn eat, have a glass of wine, walk their dog Jolly. He then returns to writing till midnight, with a day's total of about 10,000 words. Or as he said, much more when I have to, he adds. But my 2 typing fingers get awfully sore. I write by the clock and don't wait around for inspiration. Dan always made his deadlines. One story is of his New York agent phoning him and saying, he needs a nurse novel, a rush order. Can he have it in a week? As good as his word, Dan finishes 300 type pages, 75,000 word novel in a week. It became a bestseller. Dan also told another story where he was a bit late starting another book and he needed to have it delivered in a few days. They packed their bags. His wife, Marilyn, sat in the driver's seat in the car, pushing that pedal to the metal, and Dan sat in the back seat, his fingers flying on his typewriter. They pulled up to the agent's New York City office. She edited the manuscript, and then he delivered it to his agent's desk just in time. Dan said, of course I write the same story over and over. I'm writing for a market, and I give readers what they want. I like to think of them as successors to the pulp readers of 30 or 40 years ago. The characters have shivers up and down their spine. They are astonished. He said the heroine in distress must always be innocent and beautiful. And she must be sympathetic and good. How I'd love to write about a bitchy heroine sometime. Closest he came to that was the character Barnabas Collins, a 175-year-old vampire who of course needs blood, and what is he looking for? Love. His novel, The Secret of Barnabas Collins, was a huge seller. What's it about? Well, while searching for the woman who will replace his long-lost Josette and thus end the terrible curse upon him, Barnabas meets lovely Claire Duncan. The story of their romance and of terror it brings to the beautiful young noblewoman is a tale of gothic suspense that will chill and delight the legions of Barnabas Collins fans. Dan, a.k.a. Marilyn Ross, wrote 34 books about Barnabas Collins, this vampire looking for love. And he was the inspiration for the ABC TV Dark Shadows program. Dan's book sold 40 million copies of this mysterious character. It was either in 1987 or 1988 that the St. John author appeared as a guest on The Late Show with host David Letterman. When Dan was in the green room before his interview, he met Dolly Parton, another of Letterman's guests. He said he was nervous, and Dolly was very helpful. She cued him into David's mood. Letterman, he said, was a little tough at the beginning, but I was just as tough coming back, and by the end of it, I think we had a good rapport. It worked out all right. He was really curious about the number of books I wrote. The interview was good enough, I guess, because it did appear on Letterman's reruns. When Dan Ross was asked about his legacy, he said, "I expect I'll be remembered, if at all, as a writer who turned out an unusual quantity of fiction, which entertained for a time. And I suppose my chief claim to fame is my speed in producing novels. As an entertainer, I write escapist fiction. And what's wrong with escapism? You eat a meal to escape hunger. You read a novel of mystery or romance to escape boredom or worry." Dan Ross loved his beautiful home of St. John, New Brunswick. He said he couldn't imagine living anywhere else. His need to write made him a wealthy man. He wasn't ashamed of the genres or the stories he told. He was proud of the fact that his writings have been collected and preserved at Boston University. The University of New Brunswick gave him an honorary doctorate of letters in 1988. Dan Ross passed away on November 1st, 1995.